Hi, everyone. My name is Emily, and I'm 34 years old. Today, I want to share a story about something that happened a few years ago, something incredibly painful that involved my own family, and how I eventually found a way to reclaim my power. It's a story about betrayal, about feeling completely knocked down, and about how sometimes the people closest to you can be the ones who hurt you the most. I'm going to tell you the full story of how my own mother laughed in my face when I lost everything and what I did about it. Before I dive in, I'd love to know where you're watching from, so please drop your location in the comments below. And if you've ever felt betrayed or invalidated by someone you expected support from, please hit that like button. It helps me know I'm not alone in these experiences. Also, if you're interested in more stories about navigating complex family dynamics and finding your voice, make sure to subscribe. Okay, let's get into it. Growing up, my relationship with my mother was complicated. She was a woman who placed immense value on appearances, on success as defined by societal standards, money, status, a good job title. My father was the breadwinner, working for a large, well-respected corporation, the kind of place she always spoke about with a certain reverence, a place of stability and power. She admired him for it, and I always felt a subtle pressure to live up to that unspoken standard of corporate achievement. Not that she ever said it directly, but her praise for my father's career, her fascination with the business world he inhabited, it all communicated a clear message about what she deemed truly successful. I wasn't naturally inclined towards that world. I was more creative, more introspective. I loved writing, art, things she considered frivolous or hobbies, certainly not a path to a respectable career. This created a constant, low-level tension between us. My successes in school were often measured against what they could lead to in terms of a high-paying job, rather than celebrated for the knowledge gained or the skills developed. If I got a good grade on an essay, it was, "That's nice, but what jobs can you get with writing?" If I showed her a painting, it was, "Very pretty, dear, but make sure you focus on your math." That's where the real careers are. It wasn't outright discouragement, not always, but it was a persistent steering away from what I loved and towards what she valued. Despite this, I did work hard. I got good grades, went to college, chose a major that felt like a compromise, something practical enough to appease her expectations, but with a creative slant that still felt true to me. I landed a job after graduation at a reputable company, not the behemoth my father worked for, but a solid, mid-sized firm in a stable industry. My role was in communications, which blended writing and strategy, a decent fit. I was proud of myself. I navigated the job market, landed a position, was living independently. It felt like a significant step. My mother's reaction was muted. "Oh, communications? That's nice. Is it a good salary? Is it stable? Will you have good benefits?" Always the practical questions, never, "Are you happy?" or "Are you excited about the work?" The validation I craved, the simple acknowledgement of my effort and achievement, felt conditional on meeting her specific criteria of success. I tried not to let it bother me, telling myself I was doing this for me, building my own life. But deep down, that lack of unqualified support stung. It always had. It felt like I was constantly trying to earn a type of approval she wasn't really willing to give, not fully. I worked at that company for several years. I was good at my job. I got positive reviews, received small promotions, and built good relationships with my colleagues. I wasn't getting rich, but I was comfortable. I had a nice apartment, could pay my bills, and even started saving a little. I thought, maybe, just maybe, this level of stable, respectable employment would finally satisfy her. I was contributing to a 401k, I had health insurance, I was a functional, independent adult with a consistent income. What more could she want? Then, the unexpected happened. The company I worked for was acquired by a larger corporation. There was a lot of uncertainty immediately after the announcement. Rumors flew about layoffs, restructuring, departments being merged or eliminated. My team, being in internal communications, felt particularly vulnerable. We weren't directly revenue generating, and there was speculation that the acquiring company had its own established communications team that would absorb our functions. For months, we were in limbo. The stress was immense. Every meeting felt like it could be the one where we got the news. The atmosphere at work was tense, the usual office camaraderie replaced by nervous whispers and forced smiles. I tried to stay positive, to focus on doing my job well, hoping that performance would matter. I updated my resume just in case, but I desperately wanted to stay. I liked my job, I liked my colleagues, and the thought of starting over felt daunting. When the day finally came, it was brutal. We were called into individual meetings. Mine was with my manager and a human resources representative. It was quick, cold, and clinical. My role was being eliminated due to redundancy in the new organizational structure. There was no reflection on my performance, no acknowledgement of my years of service, just a brief explanation of severance, benefits continuation, and the timing of my departure. I walked out of that office building feeling numb, carrying a box of personal belongings, my identity as a gainfully employed person suddenly stripped away. The initial shock quickly turned to panic. How would I pay my bills? What about my savings? The job market felt intimidating. It had been years since I'd interviewed. I felt a wave of failure wash over me, a sense that despite all my efforts, I hadn't been good enough, stable enough, successful enough. And then, like a shadow looming over my personal dread, came the thought of telling my family. Telling my father was okay. He was pragmatic, concerned. He offered practical advice, talked about networking, shared contacts. He didn't express disappointment, only worry for my well-being. It was a relief, but also highlighted the stark difference in how my parents handled difficult news. My father's reaction was about me. My mother's reaction, I suspected, would be about what it meant for her perception of me. I decided to tell my mother over the phone. It felt easier than facing her in person, giving me a shield of distance. I called her a few days after the layoff, once the initial shock had worn off slightly, replaced by a dull ache of anxiety. I remember sitting by my window, watching the world go by, feeling utterly disconnected from it. "Hi, Mom." I started, trying to keep my voice steady. "Do you have a minute to talk? I have some news." She was busy, always busy. "Make it quick, Emily. I'm in the middle of something." Her tone was already dismissive, setting the stage. "Okay, well, it's about my job," I said, my voice cracking slightly despite my best efforts. "The company was acquired, you know?"
And?
"Well, my position was eliminated. I was laid off." There was a pause, a beat of silence that stretched, heavy with anticipation. I held my breath, hoping against hope for a word of comfort, a simple, "Oh no, I'm so sorry, dear." What came next wasn't silence. It was a sound I will never forget. A short, sharp intake of breath, followed by a laugh. Not a sympathetic chuckle, not an awkward, nervous titter. It was a genuine laugh. A sound of amusement, almost bordering on delight. You were laid off," she repeated, and the laughter bubbled up again, stronger this time. It was laced with something cruel, something triumphant. My heart sank into my stomach. I felt the blood drain from my face. "Yes, Mom. I was laid off. My job is gone." She didn't stop. "Oh, Emily," she gasped between laughs. I suppose I shouldn't be surprised, really. That communications job, it always sounded a bit tenuous, didn't it? Not like your father's work.
Corporate.
Stable. This kind of thing just happens in those creative adjacent fields, I suppose." The laughter subsided, replaced by a tone of faux pity that was somehow worse. "Well, what are you going to do now? How will you manage? Did they at least give you some severance? Not that it will last long, I imagine. Job hunting is so difficult these days, isn't it? Especially when you don't have really solid, transferable skills." I was speechless.
Stunned.
It wasn't just the laughter, though that was a hammer blow. It was the immediate shift to dismantling my career, dismissing my skills, casting doubt on everything I had achieved up to that point. The "I shouldn't be surprised" felt like the culmination of years of subtle criticism, finally made explicit in my moment of vulnerability. She wasn't consoling me. She was validating her own long-held, unspoken belief that I wasn't cut out for the kind of success she valued. "Mom," I finally managed, my voice shaking with a mix of hurt and indignation. How can you laugh? I just lost my job. I don't know what I'm going to do. Oh, I'm not laughing, she said, though her tone still held a note of amusement. It's just, well, it's a bit ironic, isn't it? You always wanted to do things your own way, not take the more traditional path. And now look, sometimes the safe, established routes are best, dear. Perhaps this is a sign. A sign? A sign of what? That I was a failure? That she was right all along? The conversation continued in this vein, a thinly veiled lecture wrapped in false sympathy. There was no offer of practical help, no genuine emotional support, just a relentless focus on my perceived shortcomings and the validation of her worldview. She brought up my father's company multiple times, contrasting my precarious situation with his long, stable career at a major corporation. That corporation, let's call it Sterling Corp, was her benchmark for success, the symbol of stability she constantly held up. My father had worked there for decades, climbed the ranks, and it represented everything she admired and aspired to be associated with through him. By the end of the call, I was in tears, not just from the stress of losing my job, but from the deep, cutting pain of my mother's reaction. It felt like a profound betrayal. In my lowest moment, instead of offering comfort, she had offered judgment and amusement. It was a turning point in our relationship, though I didn't fully realize it then. Something inside me shifted, hardened. The desire for her approval, which had been a persistent ache for so long, began to wither, replaced by a burning resentment. The months that followed were incredibly difficult. Job searching was soul-crushing. I sent out countless resumes, had endless interviews that led nowhere, and faced rejection after rejection. My savings dwindled quickly, and the stress of financial uncertainty was constant. Living off severance and dwindling savings while trying to find work was a daily exercise in anxiety. During this time, my mother's subtle jabs didn't stop. She'd call and ask, "Still haven't found anything, Emily? Maybe you need to lower your expectations. That communications work isn't in high demand, you know." Or she'd mention how well her friends' children were doing in their proper corporate jobs, a clear comparison meant to highlight my perceived failure. Family gatherings became agonizing. I tried to avoid talking about my job situation, but she would invariably bring it up, often in front of other relatives, painting a picture of me as struggling and adrift. Once, at a holiday dinner, my aunt, a kind woman, asked me genuinely how the job search was going. Before I could answer, my mother interjected, "Oh, it's tough for her, isn't it? It's a very competitive market, and she's not looking in the most secure fields. I keep telling her she should look into something more corporate, like Sterling Corp, but she's so set on her creative things," she said it with a sigh, as if my unemployment was a direct result of my stubborn refusal to conform to her idea of a real job. The implication was clear. My lack of a job was my fault, a consequence of my unwise choices, and something to be discussed and mildly pitted/judged publicly. I remember sitting there, the food tasting like ash in my mouth, feeling utterly exposed and humiliated. Everyone looked at me with varying degrees of pity or awkwardness. It was unbearable. That night, driving home, I cried harder than I had in a long time. Not just for the job loss, but for the family I wished I had, the mother who could have offered a simple hug and words of encouragement instead of judgment and public shaming. It was in the depths of this despair and anger that a different kind of feeling began to emerge, a fierce, quiet determination. I realized I couldn't change my mother, couldn't make her the supportive figure I longed for. But I could change how I reacted to her. I could stop seeking her validation and start building my own, on my own terms. Her laughter, her dismissiveness, her constant comparisons to Sterling Corp and the corporate world she revered, they stopped being sources of pain and started becoming fuel. I decided then that I wasn't just going to get a job. I was going to get back on my feet and build a life that was undeniably successful by any measure, including her own narrow definition. But more importantly, I would do it in a way that felt authentic to me. And I would find a way to show her, not through words, but through action, that her laughter, her judgment, had not broken me. The job search continued, but my approach shifted. I was more focused, more resilient in the face of rejection. I started networking more aggressively, reaching out to people in my field, attending industry events. I also started thinking outside the box. Maybe a traditional corporate job wasn't the only path. I began researching freelance opportunities, exploring different niches within communications that were growing. I also started educating myself financially. Being unemployed had forced me to look closely at my money, my expenses, my savings. I started reading books about personal finance, investing, building wealth. This wasn't something my family had ever really talked about with me, beyond the basic concept of having a stable job and saving for retirement. My father handled the finances and my mother spent it. The idea of taking control of my own financial future, of making my money work for me, was empowering. It was during this period of intense learning and reflection that the idea began to form. My mother held up Sterling Corp as the epitome of success, stability, and value. My father had built his career there. She talked about it constantly, knew the senior executives by name, followed their stock performance with interest. It was her benchmark, and she had used her perceived failure at my not-so-corporate job to laugh at me, to dismiss me, to subtly position Sterling Corp's world as superior. What if I bought shares in Sterling Corp? Not just a few token shares, but a significant investment for someone in my position. What if I, the person she deemed not cut out for real corporate success, became an owner, however small, of the very corporation she held in such high regard? It wasn't about making a quick profit. It was symbolic. It was about reclaiming the narrative. It was about taking something she used as a weapon against me and turning it into a demonstration of my own agency and capability. The idea felt audacious, maybe a little crazy. I was still looking for a steady job, my finances were tight. But the more I thought about it, the more it resonated. It was a concrete goal, something I could work towards, a secret mission that gave my struggle purpose beyond just survival. It wasn't just about getting a job anymore. It was about building real financial independence and using it to make a statement. I scaled back my expenses drastically. I cut out every non-essential cost. I cooked at home every meal, stopped socializing in ways that cost money, and took on odd freelance writing gigs I found online, anything to bring in a little extra cash while I continued the main job search. Every dollar saved felt like a tiny victory, a step closer to my goal. It was a lean, challenging period, but the resentment from my mother's laughter, transmuted into determination, kept me going. Eventually, after many more interviews and rejections, I landed a new job. It wasn't at a huge corporation like Sterling Corp, but it was a good position at a smaller, growing company in a related field. The salary was decent, the benefits were good, and the work was challenging and interesting. I was so relieved and proud. It felt like I had climbed out of a deep hole. When I told my mother, her reaction was predictably anticlimactic. "Oh, you got a job? That's good. Is it full-time? Benefits? Is the company stable? What exactly do you do there?" Still the focus on the external markers, the lack of genuine excitement for me. I gave her the details, highlighting the positive aspects, but she quickly changed the subject, moving on to discuss a relative's child who had just been accepted into a prestigious graduate program. The contrast wasn't lost on me. Even re-employed, I wasn't Sterling Corp material in her eyes. But I didn't let it dim my accomplishment this time. I knew how hard I had worked, the difficulties I had overcome. Her reaction still stung, but it didn't devastate me like before. The seed of my larger plan was already planted, growing in secret. With a stable income again, I could accelerate my savings. I lived frugally, putting away a significant portion of each paycheck. I continued to educate myself about the stock market, about Sterling Corp specifically. I learned about their business model, their financials, their competitors. It became a quiet obsession. It took time. More than a year passed from the day I lost my job. But slowly, steadily, I built up the funds. It was a substantial amount for me, a significant portion of my savings, money I could have used for other things like travel or a down payment on a car. But the symbolic value of buying into Sterling Corp outweighed everything else. Finally, the day came when I had enough saved to purchase a number of shares in Sterling Corp that felt significant. Not enough to be a major shareholder, of course, but enough that the investment represented a real commitment, a tangible stake in the company my mother held in such high esteem. I remember sitting at my computer, logging into my brokerage account, and placing the order. It felt surreal. Me, the person who wasn't corporate enough, the one whose skills were deemed tenuous, buying ownership in the very symbol of corporate success that had been used to diminish me. I didn't tell anyone. This wasn't for bragging rights. It was for a specific purpose. I waited for the right moment. I knew it had to be a public setting, ideally involving my mother and potentially other family members, the same kind of setting where she had made her dismissive comments about my job loss. The opportunity arose a few months later. My parents were hosting a family gathering, a larger-than-usual affair with aunts, uncles, cousins. It was a warm summer evening. People were chatting, laughing, enjoying food and drinks in their backyard. My mother was in her element, circulating among guests, guiding conversations, subtly highlighting her family's achievements. I was talking to one of my cousins, making small talk, when my mother approached, joining our conversation. The topic drifted, as it often did around my mother, towards careers and financial matters. My cousin mentioned something about their retirement fund, and my mother chimed in, launching into a familiar monologue about the importance of stable corporate careers and investing wisely, using Sterling Corp as her prime example. "It's where your father has spent his entire career, you know," she said, addressing my cousin but looking pointedly at me. "Such a solid company. A good, safe investment. Not like chasing fads or getting into precarious fields." She paused, took a sip of her drink, and then, with that same sigh I remembered from the holiday dinner, turned to me. "Emily's job is
Fine now.
but it's not Sterling Corp, is it? It's a smaller company. One really needs that bedrock stability." It was the opening I had been waiting for. The familiar put-down, the public comparison, the subtle insinuation of my lesser status. This time, it didn't make me shrink. It made me stand taller. I took a deep breath. "Actually, Mom," I said, my voice clear and steady, cutting through her monologue. Several people nearby turned to look. My mother's eyes widened slightly, surprised by my interruption. "It's funny you mentioned Sterling Corporation." She blinked, a hint of annoyance crossing her face. "Funny? Why is it funny, Emily?" "Because," I continued, looking directly at her, not letting her gaze waver, "I recently became a shareholder in Sterling Corporation." A ripple of surprise went through the small group of relatives around us. My mother's jaw dropped. Her carefully constructed composure faltered. You what?" she stammered. "I bought shares," I repeated calmly. "A significant number. I'm now a part owner of Sterling Corporation." Just like Dad, the last part was deliberate, a direct parallel to the example she always held up. She stared at me, speechless for a moment. The smug amusement she usually wore when discussing the topic was gone, replaced by shock and confusion.
"But how? You
were laid off. You said your new job wasn't anything big." "Yes, I was laid off," I said, my voice growing firmer. "And I remember telling you about it. I remember your reaction, Mom. Your laughter. Your comments about my job being tenuous, and how I should have chosen a more traditional path, like at Sterling Corporation. You made it very clear what you thought of my situation and my capabilities." The color drained from her face. She looked around nervously, realizing she had an audience. "That period was incredibly difficult for me," I continued, pushing through the years of suppressed hurt. "Losing my job was hard enough, but your lack of support, your dismissiveness, it made it so much worse. It felt like you were amused by my struggle, validated by my setback." "Emily, that's not fair," she started, her voice tight. "I was just trying to be realistic." "Realistic?" I challenged gently, but with steel in my tone. "Or judgmental? You used my moment of vulnerability to highlight what you saw as my failure to live up to your standards. You held up Sterling Corp as the symbol of everything I wasn't. So, I decided to prove you wrong." Not just by getting another job, but by building financial security and agency for myself. And I decided to do it, in part, by becoming a shareholder in the very company you use as your benchmark for success. I gestured slightly, taking in the surroundings. While I was struggling to find work after you laughed at me, while you were telling everyone I needed to lower my expectations because my skills weren't solid, I was working incredibly hard. Not just finding a new job, which I did, and which I'm proud of, but also educating myself about finances, saving every penny I could, and deliberately investing in my future. And yes, that included buying into Sterling Corporation. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. My mother looked cornered, her usual social grace completely gone. The relatives watching were silent, some looking uncomfortable, others clearly fascinated. So you see, Mom, I finished, my voice softer now, but carrying immense finality. Your laughter didn't break me. Your doubt didn't stop me. In fact, your dismissiveness, your judgment, the way you used Sterling Corp to make me feel small, it actually fueled me. It gave me a very specific goal. To show you, and more importantly, to show myself that I define my own success. And sometimes, I allowed myself a small, genuine smile. Success looks like buying corporate shares. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken emotions. My mother was visibly flustered, unable to produce her usual smooth denial or deflection. My father, who had come over during the commotion, stood watching, a complex expression on his face, surprise, perhaps a hint of understanding, maybe even a touch of pride I hadn't seen directed at my career choices before. Nobody really knew what to say. The moment hung in the air. My mother finally mumbled something about needing to check on the food and quickly retreated indoors. The conversation among the relatives scattered awkwardly, some attempting to resume their previous topics, others giving me hesitant, questioning glances. The rest of the gathering was strained. My mother avoided me. When we did make brief eye contact, her expression was unreadable, a mix of anger, embarrassment, and perhaps a sliver of begrudging respect. I wasn't sure. I didn't push it. I had said what I needed to say. I had stood up for myself and revealed the truth of her actions and my response to them, in front of an audience that had witnessed her public criticisms. That confrontation changed things, irrevocably. It wasn't a magical fix, didn't lead to a tearful apology and a sudden transformation in our relationship. My mother never explicitly apologized for her laughter or her comments. We didn't have a sit-down conversation where she admitted she was wrong. But the dynamic shifted. She stopped making those kinds of public comparisons. She was more guarded in what she said about my career in front of others. There was a new layer of caution in her interactions with me, a recognition, I think, that I was no longer willing to passively accept her judgments. I had drawn a boundary, not with words like, "You can't talk to me that way," but with an action that spoke volumes, an action directly related to the very things she valued and used against me. Our relationship became, in some ways, more distant, but also healthier for me. I stopped trying to win her approval. I stopped sharing details of my life that I knew she would just find a way to criticize or diminish. I focused on my own path, my own goals, building a life that made me happy and felt authentic, regardless of whether it fit her definition of success. I continued to work at my job, and I continued to invest, building my financial stability. The shares in Sterling Corp became more than just a symbol. They became part of my diversified portfolio, a reminder of how far I had come and the strength I found in myself when I was at my lowest. Looking back, that period of unemployment and my mother's reaction was one of the most painful experiences of my life. But it was also, paradoxically, one of the most transformative. It forced me to confront the unhealthy dynamic in my family, to stop seeking validation from a source that was incapable of giving it unconditionally, and to build my own foundation of self-worth. My mother's laughter, intended to diminish me, ended up being the catalyst for my greatest period of growth and empowerment. It taught me that the opinions of others, even those closest to you, don't define you. Your worth comes from within, from your resilience, your determination, and your ability to stand up for yourself and create your own path. The relationship with my mother is still complex. There are still moments of tension, still reminders of the past. But I approach them differently now. I have clear boundaries. I don't feel the need to justify myself or seek her approval. I am financially independent, professionally capable, and emotionally stronger than I was before. Buying those shares in Sterling Corp wasn't just about getting back at her. It was about taking back my power. It was about turning her weapon into my shield, her symbol of superiority into a testament to my own resilience and resourcefulness. It was about saying, quietly but definitively, "You were wrong about me." It's a journey that many of us have to navigate, learning to live authentically despite familial expectations, finding our own definition of success, and setting boundaries with loved ones whose behavior is toxic or hurtful. It's not easy, and the scars remain, but healing is possible, and empowerment is achievable. Thank you for listening to my story. Sharing this is part of processing it, and knowing that maybe it resonates with someone out there makes a difference. If you've experienced something similar, feeling invalidated or hurt by family, I'd really encourage you to share a little bit about your experience in the comments below. It can be incredibly therapeutic to know you're not alone. If this story resonated with you, if you felt that spark of understanding or shared indignation, please do hit that like button. And if you want to hear more stories about navigating difficult relationships, finding your strength, and building a life on your own terms, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Remember, your worth is not determined by someone else's laughter or their narrow definition of success. You have the strength within you to overcome setbacks, to build your own future, and to speak your truth, even when it's hard. Stay strong.